Hi, it's Terry Cooke. I've been away for a while, but we're back. You're watching Hamilton's Vital Signs, and as always, this is an opportunity for us to engage on things that matter in Hamilton and to challenge people to think about how they can make a difference in their community. And it's my real pleasure today to welcome a good friend, Sevaun Palvetzian, who is the CEO of CivicAction, a GTA and Hamilton-based non-governmental organization that focus on leadership and diversity, and have really been a connector across the region on issues like transit, affordable housing, and jobs, and a whole bunch of other things. So welcome. Thrilled to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Well, as always, I like to start with a little bit of autobiographical stuff.
Okay.
So
I'm a Virgo. I like walks on the beach. Is that what
not
you
that
think?
kind of stuff.
Okay.
How'd you get to do the work you're doing?
So I kind of have the best job in the world.
No, you don't.
Yeah,
but
I know we're going to go to blows
yeah.
over this by the time that the show's over, which will boost ratings even
Indeed,
higher than
indeed.
they are.
Yeah.
So my job at CivicAction is quite a treat because it is all about convening a cross-section of leaders who give a darn about the city or the region, the Greater Toronto Hamilton area, and want to get involved in solving some of the biggest challenges that we collectively face. I've been doing this job for about 5 years, and I never imagined that I would be doing something like this. But when I look back over my career, there is a thread in almost everything I've done that is around something to do with the civic world. And so sometimes life just presents great opportunities, and other times you hunt them. In this case, the universe presented a great place to be in this chapter with CivicAction, and I love it.
And how long in the gig?
5 years.
Time flies, doesn't it?
It does fly.
Yeah.
It does fly.
So actually, I'm not going to go where I thought I was going to go. One of the things that strikes me about CivicAction when I think about governance and the importance of governance in roles like the ones that you and I serve in is how do you attract great people who inevitably have tentacles in a whole bunch of different spheres and remain nonpartisan and to some extent above the political fray. And in your case, you've had board chairs that include former Liberal Cabinet Minister Mitzi Hunter, present Mayor of Toronto John Tory, present Provincial Cabinet Minister Rod Phillips, my buddy the CEO of the Hamilton Hospital, former Mayor of Burlington Rob McIsaac. I think he served for some period as an interim board chair.
For sure.
So how do you navigate tricky issues like affordable housing or transit or many of the myriad of other things and separate the inevitable political involvements of some of your high-profile former board members from the good work that you're trying to do?
Many of the topics we touch are very politically charged, right? Transit. You know, I had a drink with Jason Thorne just before joining you here in the studio. We were talking about the LRT and where that sits and some of the stories that went into where it will eventually be built. So politics is in a lot of aspects of life. Being partisan is a line that we don't cross over, meaning if there is a political leader who seeks elected office, so someone has been through the civic action world and then seeks elected office, we don't endorse that candidate. We don't trash talk anybody in a political way. That's just not cool and is not partisan and is not what members that we work with us for. In the ecosystem of the civic universe, there are lots of different ways to play. My view, increasingly the neutral sandbox place to play is harder to find and important to protect. So I take that part of our model, the nonpartisan aspect, very seriously, and we do everything that we can to protect that at all costs. Once neutrality is gone,
it's gone.
It's gone. Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the issues. But before we actually get into the substance of any of the things that you've identified through CivicAction as priorities, it strikes me that one of the things that you spoke to my board about at a retreat not that long ago was the rise of populism and nativism, and to some extent the dumbing down of public policy and the diminishment of the importance of evidence. And it strikes me that old Daniel Patrick Moynihan line about you're entitled to your opinion, but not your own facts is truer now than it's ever been.
Yeah.
But how do you work your way through the inevitable movement towards oversimplifying issues? Because many of the things we're talking about involve complexity and a need to look at what's the evidence suggest will work or won't.
It is the balance between, let's call them on the extremes, the slogan, the bumper sticker slogan, and the wonk over on this end as well. We have the attention span as humans right now of like a squirrel climbing a tree. And so it is really difficult in 6-second videos or 240 character tweets to convey policy depth. It is essential that somebody does that policy depth, right?
For sure.
So in that pipeline on how policy gets decided, there has to be at the front end a lot of due diligence and thoughtful deliberation and smart policy work with research, with data, with consultation, with partners. But as it moves through the pipeline and comes out the other end as public announcements, you don't need to drag all that stuff with it. Sometimes what happens is we scratch the surface of all of that pipeline and don't do all the work, and it shows, right? It shows because ideas haven't been tested and the reaction by stakeholders is very negative because they weren't necessarily engaged. So I'm definitely a fan of doing the work and the appropriate steps to make sure smart policy and planning is done. But I don't think we need to bore people in how we convey those messages. We do have 6-second attention spans. We do need the 240 character tweet. And sometimes the most gifted politicians can do one or the other. It takes something quite rare to be able to do both.
Indeed. So let me push you on issues. You've got a summit coming up.
We do, in April.
In April. That will bring together bright, particularly younger people and diverse people to look at a short list of critical issues that will hopefully resonate, but that will very much inform the future of the Greater Toronto and Hamilton areas. And I want you to talk a little bit about the issues. I also want you to put a little bit of Hamilton context on it, because inevitably in a town like this, you've spent enough time here, there's a bit of a complacent sense that we don't need to be much concerned about the region beyond our borders, and why do we care about what happens at Bay and Yonge? Bay and Yonge don't intersect, so that probably isn't the right intersection. But downtown Toronto, I mean, it is. So talk about the relevance of a region-wide perspective, and particularly the connectedness of Hamilton to the well-being of the rest of the region.
How we work as a region is the only thing that matters for our future. So when we think about Canada's place in the world, a lot is in the international media right now about Canada's relationship with the US, Canada's relationship to China. We are a trade-driven nation. And so how we work as little clusters of cities and towns matters because our GDP contribution is as a cluster. It isn't as municipal wards and 2.2 million trips a day cross through municipal boundaries in our region, GTHA every day. And when we compete with other corners of the globe for business, for partners, for supply chain, we're competing as a region. So that's important. We live like that, we plan like that, and we compete like that economically. When we look at our topics at our summit every 4 years, and it's kind of an interesting model where every 4 years we hit Control-Alt-Delete, we do reload our dance card on what are the urban issues that are important. When I started this job 5 years ago, I was somewhat dubious that 4 years was the right amount of time. Do the urban issues shift that significantly that you need to reload? And B, can you get enough done in those 4 years to then move on to the next crop? I was wrong on both fronts. They do shift and you can get enough done. And we are civic action, not civic chit chat. So we focus on getting stuff done. This crop of issues will include the following. Housing affordability, huge issue. And an issue that is rising in Hamilton as well. You know, dear friends who bought into the housing market here about 20 years ago, 15 years ago, and just watching these numbers jump as different groups are fleeing Toronto and coming down the road to buy affordable housing, well, that's coming out of reach for a lot of local residents. For sure. And people that were already hanging on just by the wire are being pushed further and further out.
So displacement is an issue.
Huge issue. So housing affordability. Second one we're talking about is inclusion. You know, this region is the most diverse on the planet, and yet our decision makers don't
look like that.
Not cool.
Yeah.
Time to make that different. So that's the second one that we're talking about. Climate change and resilient city. Part of our region lives right in floodplains and paths of where climate change and extreme weather is really shaking our foundations. We need to have a better handle on that and get used to what's coming down the pipe. And one of the topics that I know is really sensitive here in Hamilton is around sex trafficking. Not a topic we've touched before, but it is one of the fastest growing criminal activities in the world today. And our region has been particularly hard hit. So that's going to be another topic that we look to build coalitions of actors to address and to hopefully wipe right off our region.
And we've got about 1 minute to break. Tell me a little bit about format and process around the summit.
We bring together 500 leaders, rising and established. We put the ideas out there and we start the ideation on what the actions are we can solve. And this year we're doing something with your group at the Hamilton Foundation, Community Foundation, and others, including the Chamber of Commerce, to do a series of civic dish lunches and dinners leading up to the summit. We can have you, over your meal, give us ideas on some of the things that we should take action on
and to
in these areas.
Set the table.
Set the table.
Great. We're going to go to break. I'm Terry Cooke. You're watching Hamilton's Vital Signs. My guest is Sevaun Palvetzian, the CEO of CivicAction. We will be right back after this commercial break.
Hi, I'm Greg Lenko, host of Hammer Happenings on Cable 14. Join me to find out about events going on in your area, or if you just want to see my funky socks, tune in and watch and get involved in our community. If you've got an event you'd like to see featured on Hammer Happenings, make sure to contact us by visiting www.cable14.com/request-access. I know it's a lot to take down and a lot to remember, but you can do it really easily just by looking at the screen. Okay, see you soon.
Friday night, March the 1st, the OHL Tonight comes to you for the First Ontario Centre. The Hamilton Bulldogs begin a back-to-back against the league's best two teams. Up first are the Ottawa 67s, boasting the league's leading goal scorer, Ty Felleber. This should be an incredible matchup between a hungry Bulldogs team and an Ottawa 67 squad that might be looking at their first-round opponent. You can catch all the action live in HD right here on Cable 14, beginning at 7 p.m.
And we're back. Terry Cooke, you're watching Hamilton's Vital Signs, and I'm with Sevaun Palvetzian talking about the work of CivicAction, the summit that's coming up, and really navigating some really tumultuous political waters, both as an NGO and in terms of the leadership of our communities. And we touched on diversity in leadership and the fact that whether it's corporate boards or city councils or school boards or foundations, we haven't necessarily done a great job at reflecting the communities and the changes that are happening demographically. Yeah. And I specifically want to ask you, as a female leader of a major organization, first of all, why does diversity matter? And reflect a little bit upon the differences in how do you get to opportunity when maybe you weren't born here, or maybe you look differently than the traditional corporate boardroom, and what are the unique challenges in fulfilling the expectations and the role, in your opinion? So start with your own journey, and then let's talk about why diversity matters.
I've been very fortunate in my career. I have had, and I would say it actually started, I was very fortunate with my family. So I was raised in a household where my first classroom was the kitchen table. And so we'd come home from school, or, when my dad would come home from work, my mom stayed at home to raise us. And we would have these really heated conversations around the dinner table. The CBC radio was almost always playing in the background, and so we were infused with a natural curiosity. And we were raised to expect to have a view on something, but importantly, know how to substantiate it. And so that was an early gift in being able to learn to hold your voice at the table. And being from a big family, it was pretty loud. That ability was molded into us as kids. And I have had a series of brilliant mentors, both men and women, who encouraged me along each part of my career. But when I look around some of the boardrooms that I have the great privilege of walking into, that you have the great privilege of walking into, the diversity that's in those boardrooms is often not reflective of the diversity that's on the streets below them. That's a huge problem. Yeah. These problems that we deal with, these city building issues, are so messy, are so complicated, that what a disservice we are doing to them to not have the wisdom of crowds attached to their analysis. What a disservice we're doing to young men and women being raised in these cities to not see a path to the top in careers or sectors that they may aspire to. And what a disservice we're doing. You know, I live downtown Toronto. Our motto is diversity, our strength. Well, it's only a strength, it's only an asset when you mine it.
Yep. Not if it's sitting on a bench.
Not if it's sitting under the ground or on the bench. Yep. So, so part of what we do at CivicAction is develop the next generation of civic leadership. And it is as diverse as the population we serve in terms of gender, sector, ethnicity, race, background. We've had some extraordinary leaders come through from Hamilton in part of our program, and in particular our Diverse City Fellows program. Keenan Loomis, the president of the Chamber, sits on the recruitment panel for that every year and has been a huge proponent for local Hamilton talent. That matters, because in those programs we shave 10 years off your career trajectory.
I got to be a mentor, and it was as positive an experience and as much a learning experience for me as the mentor as I'm sure it was for the mentee. So
it's
just
amazing.
A great window into different perspectives, right?
And so you think about, we're deliberate about succession planning for civic leadership. Like, who else does that? Yep. It's amazing. And it also helps to neutralize the excuses when people say, oh yeah, the talent's just not there.
Yep.
The talent is in the pipeline.
Yep.
It's who controls the tap at the end of that pipeline that is the issue. So I'm really proud of the work that we've done, and we launched a CivicAction Leadership Foundation a few years ago so that we could take that work and take it to the next level. Tim Hockey is the chair of that work with us, and I'm really pleased at the progress and thrilled and optimistic about the talent that comes through it.
I've got to tell you, your reflections on growing up in so many ways reflect my own.
Is that right?
My grandmother was the chair of the school board here in a time when women, by and large, didn't lead in elected capacities. And of course, I went on to a political career that I'm sure wouldn't have been possible in my mind had I not seen my grandmother go through that stuff. And
So
of course, here we are 50 years or thereabouts thereafter, and my wife just got elected to City Council with the largest contingent of female leaders, elected leaders on Hamilton City Council in our history, 7
That's
out of 15.
amazing.
And I think for all of the next generations, that ability to see yourself in a position or to aspire to something beyond what you can imagine right now is so critical.
It's so critical, and you have to see a version of you somewhere to give you the sense that it's possible.
Yep.
Jane Goodall, you know, the wonderful, and she's done some extraordinary work. So 2/3 of people in that field that study chimpanzees, monkeys, are women.
Yep.
2/3. Why? Because the image that we have is a woman. There are not many male disciplines in the same way in terms of science, in some cases tech. So it's very powerful to see someone that looks like you, that's reflective of who you are, up at the top. And until that happens, it doesn't necessarily flip on your own switch to see the potential for you to be there as well.
Yep. And there's a macro application to the ability to serve as a magnet for people from around the world to come to your community, to your region. And I often use the contrast between Buffalo and Toronto over the last 50 years. Buffalo, of course, 50 years ago was the vibrant mecca for culture and sports and learning and a whole bunch of other things. It was growing, it was bustling, it was prosperous. Toronto was a sleepy little provincial town. And in the course of the subsequent 50 years, they completely reversed fortunes. And one of the great differences was Toronto continued to attract population from around the globe, while Buffalo was in fact shrinking. And we always, anytime people talk to me about the challenge of new people coming to the community, and they're real, the issues around settlement particularly, I say But the alternative is in fact death for a community. The point at which we close our borders and don't aspire to be a place that is welcoming is a point at which your economic trajectory, almost without exception, will be a negative one. Totally. So let's talk about that, because one of the challenges of adding 100,000 people a year is in fact around transit and housing. And I want you to come back and just reflect upon the importance of those issues, and how do we get to kind of grown-up conversations about some of the hard decisions that are going to be necessary if this region that we call home is going to be as prosperous and successful in the next generation as it has been for those of us who have grown up here over the last couple.
It's going to be different. There's no question.
Change is hard.
It is going to be different. You know, when we'll take those in different chunks. On the transit and infrastructure side, like we took a 30-year funding vacation from investing in transit infrastructure, and it shows.
It sure does.
So the costs are in the multiples of tens of billions just to get us out of the hole. Not even the net new build that we need to catch up to the 100,000 that are arriving every year. But when you stopped funding for 30 years, stop building for 30 years, surprise, surprise, you're behind. So part of that, I think that the challenge is we need to have an honest to goodness, frank conversation with people. Because as taxpayers, certainly in the City of Toronto, we have not seen that cost built into the cost of living in a transparent and legitimate way. And then you have politicians who try to sneak it in there and say, no, God, we need to increase X. We need to add road tolls. We need to do a different revenue tool. We need a sales tax. And people say, wait, no, I'm not into this. I want the other guy that says I don't need to raise taxes. Well, eventually...
By the way, you said road tolls, but you kind of skipped over that, because inevitably, when I look out a decade or more, congestion pricing will be a fact of life in our communities, because it's the only way to efficiently use the very expensive road infrastructure that we have and to fund a transit system that will keep us moving. And I've expressed that to various leaders over the years, and inevitably, as it gets close to that, third rail, people duck. And part of our responsibility is to allow that conversation to unfold in a way that's a little less fraught.
Well, having the conversation unfold is key. Having the power to actually do it is really what's important to nudge. The province, all of our cities are creatures of the province. So in the case of Toronto decide to do some road tolls, because in the City of Toronto Act we do have that ability, but the fine print requires us to get the green light from the province of Ontario to make it happen. Our mayor, John Tory, a few years back, knocked on the door of Queen's Park, said, I'd like to do this. Put the target on his back as a politician to do this, and the premier of the day said no. So I don't disagree with you, Terry, that what we've been doing isn't working, but the orders of government all need to be working with the same outcome as a shared goal, or we're going to keep running into the frustration that we've sat in. And people are frustrated. I mean, 2 nights ago, trying to get home, we had the snowstorm, and I'm trying to get home to get the kids, and it's too cold to walk. Normally I could, it's a hike, about an hour, but couldn't do that. I was like, I'm never going to get there. So hopped on 3 different streetcars, because one broke down, one did a short turn, and the subway was so ridiculous you couldn't even get down the escalator to get on the platform. So, and I live downtown and work downtown, so I was able to get to the kids' childcare center and then scooped up some other kids and just brought them home and gave them some snacks as their parents were trying to get back into the core. It doesn't work. The system is already broken, and the cracks are fault lines, right? And so infrastructure around transit, around hydro, around sewage, all of these things are going to be a problem. Housing affordability is another big one. It's just exploded.
So we're almost out of time, but the last thing in the 90 seconds or so we have left that I want you to turn your mind to is, how is it that average citizens can get engaged in this? How do they affect change? Where do their voices count or matter in the process? And how does the work that we're doing collectively harness some of that imagination, some of that talent, and some of that passion for the kind of changes that we're talking about here?
I think the most important question to ask yourself is, what am I passionate about? Finding the topic and then figuring out what the levers are to push it. So if the topic is public parks, if you are a park enthusiast, or if you're a bike lane enthusiast, or if you are a quality child care, affordable, then find an issue. Don't take them all on at the same time. It's overwhelming and you'll drown. But pick the one or two issues that are important to you, and then find out what your local councillor is saying about these issues, or your MPP or your MP. Get informed, find your passion, get informed about where there are alignment or misalignment in terms of your elected officials, and then what are those community groups or agencies or associations that you can jump onto and have your voice expand into a chorus. There's no shortage of NGOs and charities in our country that are doing great work. Second largest NGO charitable sector in the world is Canada. So finding a cause and then jumping on to a band is what many of us do to find our foot into the world of civic engagement. It's more than voting every 4 years.
Sure is.
There's a lot of ways to find a lane.
Way beyond the ballot box. And sadly, on that note, we're out of time. Thank you. Thanks for the work you're doing. Thanks for your continued involvement and connection to Hamilton, and we look forward to participating both in the setting the table process with the Chamber and the Community Foundation and others here, but also being part of the summit in April with folks from across the GTA and Hamilton. Sevaun Palvetzian, great to have you with us.
Thank you.
You've been watching Hamilton's Vital Signs. My guest tonight has been Sevaun Palvetzian from CivicAction. I'm Terry Cooke. As always, you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Hope you'll join us again next month. Over and out. Take care.